Hi, folks, and welcome back to edition 3 of MMA Talking Heads. I'm your host, Jason Probst, with our lovely and talented co-host, Loretta Hunt. Loretta Hunt, how are you doing?
I'm great, Jason. How are you? This is long overdue.
I know. Had a lot go on. We had UFC 129 in Canada, 55,000 fans. And the topic this week we want to touch on is Randy Couture and what he's done and how he went out against Lyoto Machida. Now, Randy taken out in the second round by, I guess it was a crane kick from Lyoto Machida, declared his retirement immediately afterward in his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan. First off, do you think the retirement is going to stick? Yes or no?
Yes, I do. After talking to Randy Sunday, the day after the fight, and him talking to me private off the record, it's sticking, definitely. He's ready to move on. This is a lot different than the first time he retired. The first time he retired, he had a lot of personal problems going on. He was going through his second divorce. He was having issues with Team Quest, which he was essentially breaking away from at that time. And these were his close friends, Dan Henderson, Matt Lenland. So it was a really stressful time for him, and he kind of needed to leave the sport and regroup a bit. And I always suspected he'd come back, and then he did. This time it's totally different. He's a lot more settled in all those other areas. And I think he just feels like it is time. He is listening to his body, and he realizes that it's time for him to finish, and he's kind of started setting some other goals in the sport. So I definitely think it's going to stick for sure. I said, Randy, what if they get Fedor this fight?
Right, the big
And
one.
I said in a lot of ways this fight makes more sense now because Fedor is coming off two losses, and it doesn't seem like it would be such an underdog blowout fight for you. And he said, no, he said, I don't think I'm there anymore. I'm just at a different point in my career. And he goes, I think Fedor probably is too. So
Mhm.
yeah, definitely think it's going to stick.
Now, talking about, here's an interesting question about Randy I wanted to throw your way. Similar to maybe some of his contemporaries, Matt Hughes and Tito Ortiz, Randy fought at a time, especially near the last few years of his career, where the competition got a lot better. Where do you rank Randy all time in terms of fighters?
Oh God,
Is
it's a
that an easy
curveball to
question
throw
to
me.
answer, right?
No, I just God, when people ask me such big questions like that, I'm not the type of journalist that can jump right, and say he's number three, he's number
Right.
four. Uh, and you got to get a little more specific about what you're asking. You
Light
said greatest
heavyweight, 205 pounds. Where does he rank all time? Right
all
at you.
time. I mean, for different reasons, depending on what your criteria is, my criteria would probably be a little bit different. But like, I would think greatest of all time means not only the job they did and their performances, but also how they affected that weight class. Randy's move down to the light heavyweight class not only revitalized that weight class. When we had that whole Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture
Right.
triangle going on, but it helped revitalize the sport. It was one of Zuffa's big trilogies that really got them over the hump. Remember, Randy and Chuck Liddell were the coaches of the Ultimate Fighter One. So, for all those reasons, and I think he had some great performances in there. I guess, I would say he's somewhere in the top 10, but as a light heavyweight, if you want to just go by performance, he wouldn't be, the top, at least the top guy, or, he would be somewhere in the middle of the pack, maybe lower, 5 to 10. So it depends on your criteria. I mean, I think when we do talk about the UFC light heavyweight class forever,
Right.
from here on out, his name will be mentioned for sure. And people will have that name will have different connotations to people.
Well, I think one of the things that Randy did do that was a huge trendsetter was the trend of dropping down in weight. And he talks about it in his book with you about how, a lot of people were like, oh, you can't drop down to 205. How are you going to do it? And he did it really easy because of his wrestling background. He really kicked off a trend. I mean, everybody drops down in weight. I mean, there's a countless number of guys that have followed his trend as if they run into a certain level they can't surpass at one weight class. They just drop down in weight. And Randy really was the first major guy to start that off. And you just say nothing of his accomplishments of winning the heavyweight title, light heavyweight title multiple times both, and really being a pioneer and being that critical linchpin in that Liddell Ortiz trilogy. Right at a time, I think 2003, 2004, when the sport was really kind of had lagged, and I think Zuffa was kind of at a crossroads with whether or not to to continue, and obviously his role in the reality show. So speaking on that, on Randy Couture and Loretta Hunt, you did write a book on him, and that's the main topic of today's episode. What is it about access to a fighter that are the good things for a journalist, and some of the potential downfalls and fallout from that?
Yeah, I'm so glad we have this MMA Talking Heads to talk about stuff like this because I get asked a lot about it and about crossing that line with a fighter and becoming too friendly with them and not being able to stay objective. And when Randy approached me to do his book back in it was literally it was 3 weeks or something like that before the Ultimate Fighter debuted. So we're talking early 2005. He came to me. I met with him in New York City. He was there doing some promo work for the show that was about to debut, which we didn't know was going to be, the show that turned the sport around essentially in the
Mm-hmm.
US. And I was chattering away and about all different things. And he waited for me to be quiet and said, "Well, do you want another project to work on?" I go, "What do you mean?" And all of it, he said, "Do you want to do this book with me?" And originally with Randy, it was actually someone had written a movie script about his life,
Mm-hmm.
and the movie script needed some work. It was based on his life, but very loosely based on his life, and it wasn't quite factual. And at the time, they were thinking I would write the book to like the companion book to go with the movie, and of course I said yes, but then after that it kind of evolved into writing his autobiography with him, his memoirs. Because usually you write the memoirs and then the screenplay is written from the memoirs, so it was kind of in reverse. But yeah, when I said yes, I had no idea what implications that had as being a journalist, and I
Right.
remember. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even know, And I remember talking to a few journalists about it afterwards, and a couple of them kind of said, "Oh, it's not a big deal. It doesn't matter." And then a couple of them were like, "Well, this is going to kind of change how the way you write about him." And I kind of made the decision that while I'm working on books with fighters or sports figures in MMA, I don't really report about them.
Right.
That's my choice. And depending on where I've worked, my editors have agreed with me. Some have thought it's not really a necessity because they trust me that I'll be unbiased. But with Rainey in particular, I mean, the biggest example was I knew for a couple months that he was considering leaving the UFC in 2007,
Right. That's a
over.
perfect case test of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had the inside track on that for a very long time. He only told me and a couple other people, and he told me because he wanted to make sure, I was writing the book, and he wanted to make sure that I was up on the information and all that. But I kept it confidential, and the outlet that I worked for did break the story. It was the Fight Network at the time, and I had Randy talk to a colleague of mine, Brian Knapp, who was working at the Fight Network and is now at Sherdog. And he physically broke the story, although everyone kind of knew my connection with Randy had gotten Fight Network that story. And, it was a huge story. It was probably the biggest story of 2007. But because I was in a relationship with Randy, and I'm talking a financial relationship, when I do these books, I get paid. And I essentially get paid from the fighter, which
Right.
changes my relationship with them. Yeah, I just I don't really write about them. That's why you haven't seen me write any stories about John McCarthy over the last couple years. Other than if he was mentioned in if it's something very, very standard. I just did an article on judging, and in one of the boxes we had the ABC recommended judging courses, and John happens to be one of the ones that are approved. So I listed him with all the other approved judging courses from the ABC for that judging article I wrote for Fight Magazine.